good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. And welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that everybody is having a great and wonderful day. We know, especially in my area, that spring has sprung. And why do I say that? Because we have the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees all doing their thing finally. The bees are doing their thing right in front of my door, but they're doing their thing, and so we know that spring is officially here. They are trying to collect their pollen and do all of their fertilizing and moving around as much as they possibly can. So spring is here, thank God. We're praying that the vestiges of winter are far, far away. Yes, we have bees and wasps. So we had some people to come out this morning to hopefully help us with that. We don't want to destroy their habitat, but we don't necessarily want them right at our front door. So, welcome to Teachable Tuesday. For those of you who are new to Daring Dialogues, we try to be here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Unless there is an emergency or I need to take a break, which has been pretty rare. We are here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and every single day of the week we cover something different. So if you want to be motivated, you want to be encouraged, you want to be inspired, check me out on Mondays. Today is Teachable Tuesday, so we're going to be talking history, primarily Black history and immigration today. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about healthy relationships. I do want to let my YouTube streamers know that I will be on my Facebook Live tomorrow. I will be on Periscope and Facebook Live tomorrow for that talk on healthy relationships because we're going to be talking about mean girls in the church. Yeah, we're going to be talking about how to deal with that, how to deal with the clicking, and how to deal with tribalism and all of those types of things. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow on Periscope and on the Facebook live stream. So I will not be able to run my YouTube live stream tomorrow. All right, but you can go to my personal page and you'll be able to join me for that. It will be set on public, so you can join me for that live stream. Thursdays, we cover theology, worldviews, and philosophy. So it's Thinking Thursday. That's what we like to do. I believe that we do the body of Christ a disservice when we don't talk about worldviews, philosophy, and theology and how that ties into how people see the world. Because if you don't understand how people see the world, it's going to be hard to win them and share the gospel with them. So we need to be well rounded in that regard. And then Fridays, we close out the week with health and finance. Health and finance. And right now, we have really been focusing more on finance. Y'all, excuse me, I'm being distracted by my earring. There we go. So Fridays we close out with health and finance, and right now we have been on the topic of cash, capital, and credit. Cash, capital, and credit. All right. So let us dig in today. We have the history of the black dollar. We're going to continue reading from Heart and Soul, which is the illustrated book by Kadir Nelson. And we are continuing our talk on immigration, and we stopped on Latin immigration. And so I think I'm going to start here today, so we make sure that we continue to cover this concerning immigration. And yeah, we've got just a few more pages to finish up under Latin immigration. Remember, we started out by talking about how the U.S., even though we like to pretend as if we have such a problem with Mexican immigrants, the fact of the matter is, historically, the United States wanted these Mexican immigrants. They wanted them to come over. They wanted the cheap labor. They wanted their expertise in agriculture. All right. So we really do need to understand history so that when we see some of these messages start cropping up, we can recall and call people back to the table on reality. And that reality is we actually wanted Mexican immigration. And not only did we want Mexican immigration, but there were officials who were helping them to come over, even though they knew it was quote unquote against the rules and against the law. It was actually our officials that were helping them to sneak over. All right. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to continue that talk. The U.S. Mexican Border Patrol, we talked about that they were formed in 1924 to keep immigrants from entering the United States except through official POEs or port of entry. More than 90 years later, some agents still ride horses where motor vehicles can't go. All right. So here we go. We were reading concerning a gentleman by the name of Ramon Lizarraga, and this is a part of his story. Ramon came to the United States in 1903. He worked as a musician for 2 years, then went back to Mexico. In 1926, he returned to California buying a car, a Model T Ford. There were still no quota restrictions that kept him from coming. He drove back to Mexico, sold his farm, and drove his wife and children to Los Angeles to settle permanently. Like Ramirez, he was still living there in the 1970s. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was not enough work for everyone, either American or immigrant. And remember, we talked about this issue of work because they're saying within the next 20 to 25 years that we're going to run into that problem again, not because of people, but because of technology, because of the robotics industry. All right. This is why you're seeing some of the big box stores begin to shut down. People are going online. They have self-serving checkouts. So are you going to blame the checkout counter for your lack of a job? Or are you going to look to your fellow human being and say, it's your fault I don't have a job? All right. We got to be smarter. People with a Mexican heritage, even those who were American citizens, were targeted in raids and roundups. Did you hear that? People with a Mexican heritage, even those who were American citizens, were targeted in raids and roundups. Same thing happening now. I just read an article last night about a gentleman who spent over 1,200 days in the ICE refugee captivity, and he was an American citizen, but he was rounded up with everybody else. All right. Over 400,000 Mexicans and Mexican Americans, some say over 1 million, were encouraged, bullied, or forced into returning to Mexico. This is called repatriation, returning immigrants to their native countries. And remember, I want to remind you that the upcoming census is going to be asking all Black people in this country, what is your country of origin? All right? If you're Black American, you better say America. We're not talking about the country of your descendants. What is your country of origin? All right? And why do I say that? Because more than likely, they're going to use that information to try to repatriate you back to a country that you don't know the language of, you don't know the people of, and all you know is maybe possibly your descendants descended from that particular country. All right? So you have to be careful. Good morning, Lady Evelyn. You have to be careful when people are asking you to fill out certain documents and you don't know the motive behind what they're having you to fill out. This is called repatriation, returning immigrants to their native countries. And let me say this, for those of you who are doing all of the DNA testing, Ancestry.com, African Ancestry, all right, most of that they will tell you is a bit of guesswork. All right. So it's not 100% accurate. Just want to be clear on that, because some people are taking those DNA tests as the gospel truth. All right. Do some research on that. Research, Google the reliability of Ancestry DNA tests, and you'll get all the information on it. Okay. And some of those tests can collect your, I know especially with Ancestry.com, they can collect your DNA. And if you don't read the fine print, it can bar your own family from receiving your DNA in the future. Hello, Henrietta Lacks. All right. So those of you who are freely handing out your DNA samples, you don't know what they're doing with your DNA beyond telling you where you come from in a supposed country. All right. Again, we have to be smarter. That's all. Let's continue to read. In the 1940s, however, even before the United States entered World War II in 1941, industry and farm production increased and more workers were needed. The United States and Mexico started the Bracero program, or bracero means someone who works using his arms, a manual worker. The program allowed Mexican laborers to work in the United States for short periods of time. They would have contracts that guaranteed them a fair wage and decent working conditions, but only men could come. They could not bring wives and families. The first braceros came to the United States in 1942. The program lasted until 1964. In 1955, braceros were supposed to earn 50 cents per hour. In Mexico, farm laborers were earning about 65 cents a day. Ariolano Ocampo left his home in a small town in Mexico to travel to Edinburgh, Texas. His contract allowed him to work from May 11 to June 8, 1955, packing tomatoes and melons. He was placed in a house with other braceros. It was in poor condition and very dirty. We didn't have a chance to clean it as we arrived after dark. We didn't sleep good because of the condition of the cots. Each man was supposed to receive $1.15 a day to buy his own food. Instead, 6 braceros were given $3.19 to share. They were paid 30 cents an hour rather than the 50 cents they had been promised for their work. Some braceros returned to Mexico or arranged illegally to work with other farmers when they had found bad conditions. Mexican immigrants who came without proper documents were insultingly called wetbacks because they supposedly swam the Rio Grande to enter the United States. As a wetback alone, safely across the border, I may find a farmer who needs one man, said Carlos Morales. He will pay me honestly, I think. But as a bracero, I am only a number on a paycheck, and I am treated like a number, not like a man. American ranch and farm owners liked using bracero labor. They could keep wages low. This upset American laborers who could not find jobs at decent wages. And they blamed the Mexican immigrants. What's new? In the 1950s, farm wages rose all over the United States, except in the areas where braceros worked. Anti-Mexican sentiment was usually strongest where the most Mexican immigrants lived, the American Southwest in California. In the 21st century, states such as Arizona, Texas, and California have tried to pass their own laws dealing with immigrants, including denying state government benefits to undocumented residents. The bracero program was supposed to stop undocumented immigrants from coming to the United States. Instead, the number increased. Men who did not have the money and time to get papers through the bracero program, or who were not accepted because of the number of braceros was limited, or who wanted to come with wives and families, came anyway. Some traveled beyond the Southwest, getting higher paying jobs in cities like Chicago. And some moved back and forth between Mexico and the United States, sometimes legally and sometimes not. The next time I came over, I had papers and I worked in the fields for a while, says Jose Garcia, who immigrated in 1959 to California. But then I got this job in the mushroom plant. The main reason I like it is it's less heavy work and it's more steady. I've been here for 10 years now. Of course, they favor the Anglos in the plant. They give them the easier jobs. They don't like Mexicans to touch the machinery, you know. Where I work, if they had the custom of carrying things on a burro, a small donkey, they wouldn't let the Mexicans touch the burro. Like the early German, Irish, Southern, and Eastern European, Jewish, and Asian immigrants before them, Mexican immigrants were met with fear and prejudice. Fear and prejudice. Fear and prejudice. Fear and prejudice. What's new? What are we going to change? In 1954, Joseph M. Swing became Commissioner General of the Immigration and Naturalization Service, now the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which govern immigration. He believed that an alarming, ever-increasing flood tide of undocumented immigrants was an actual invasion of the United States. He authorized Operation Wetback, a direct attack upon the hordes of aliens facing us across the border. Notice when people use words like aliens or illegal, it dehumanizes a person, so it makes it easier for you to treat them as other, treat them as stranger, and not treat them as a human being. Many, but not all, were living in the Southwest. The operation also deported workers from southeastern states as well as from northern cities where they worked in industry. From 1953 through 1955, Operation Wetback located and sent back to Mexico more than 800,000 undocumented immigrants. At the same time, more Mexicans signed up for the Bracero program in this period, but undocumented immigrants kept coming too. What happens to immigrants who are deported after they've been living in the United States for years, and what happens to their children? Their home life was suddenly broken. They were compelled to sell homes and possessions at a great sacrifice. Their incomes ended. They were picked up by the Border Patrol at night and dumped on the other side of the river in numbers so great that Mexico's railways and bus lines could not move them into the interior of Mexico fast enough. Said one Texas resident about a 1950 deportation drive, thousands of these families were stranded along the border, destitute without food or funds or employment. Americans often grouped all Mexicans together, longtime legal immigrants, American citizens, and undocumented aliens, and looked down on them with fear that they would take their jobs or were criminals. What's new? Even American citizens of Mexican heritage experienced discrimination. Tomas Rivera was born in the United States in 1935 to Mexican migrant workers who worked everywhere from Texas to Minnesota. He wrote a novel about his life from 1945 to 1955. His young character needed a haircut, so he went into the barber shop, but then the barber told him that he couldn't cut his hair. He thought the barber didn't have time, so he remained seated waiting for the other barber. But this barber told him the same thing, that he couldn't cut his hair. Furthermore, he told him that it would be better if he left. He crossed the street and stood there, but then the barber came out and told him to leave. Tomas Rivera became a respected novelist, poet, and educator. He was the first Chicano to hold one of the highest positions in the University of California system as the chancellor at Riverside campus. The Bracero program ended in 1964. With mechanized farming and new technology, farms needed fewer human workers, but undocumented immigrants kept arriving. In 1990, Cesar Millan, who was 21, was trying to cross the border from Tijuana. He met a man who said he could take him across. The coyote charged me $100. For me, that was God sending me somebody to tell me to cross because I was already trying for 2 weeks and no luck. While he tried to earn the money, Millan explained, to survive, you sweep floors, you ask for food, they see you're dirty. Some people give you tacos, some people say no, but you can survive because your adrenaline is feeding you, and somehow your body conserves whatever you eat. I ate tortillas. I ate whatever people gave me because I wanted to save money. I slept in the street. The street was my house. Cesar Millan became a famous dog trainer in the United States, known as the Dog Whisperer. He has had his own television shows. Milan became a citizen in 2009. Mexico is my mother nation, but America is my father nation because America gave me the direction that I should take. So, how do I feel about finally being a part of a country that I'm in love with? I have a great amount of appreciation because my children were born here and the world got to know me here. It was hard to touch my dreams, but this is the place in the world where dreams come true. Although immigration from Mexico is most often in the news, immigrants come to the United States from South and Central America and Spanish speaking Caribbean islands as well. They come to achieve a better life. I am rising in my job, said Jamie Alvarez, who immigrated from Peru in 1971. Large numbers of people from Puerto Rico also came to the United States. The island was owned by Spain until its defeat in the Spanish American War in 1898. Like the Philippines, Puerto Rico became an American territory. It is now called the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. All Puerto Ricans were granted U.S. citizenship in 1917 if they live in the United States. If they stay in Puerto Rico, they do not have all the benefits of American citizenship, which we could see once those hurricanes barreled through there. If they stay there, those who come to this country are technically not immigrants, yet they have faced much discrimination and often struggled to make a living. Many are black, so they experience prejudice both as Hispanics and as black people. Perry Thomas's mother was Puerto Rican and his father was Cuban. He grew up in East Harlem in New York City in the 1930s and 40s. When he was 13 years old, the weather turned cold one more time, and so did our apartment. The cold, plastered walls embrace that cold from outside and make it a part of the apartment, till you don't know whether it's better to freeze in the snow or freeze by the stove. His mother told him, I like Los Estados Unidos, but it's sometimes a cold place to live. Not because of the winter and the landlord not giving heat, but because of the snow in the hearts of the people. The first Puerto Ricans who came to the United States found it hard to break out of poverty. Perry Thomas was angry, turned to crime, and spent 7 years in prison. He got his high school degree there and began to write. His autobiography, Down These Mean Streets, in 1967, became a classic. He spent much of his life trying to help young people at risk. Many Puerto Ricans embraced family and cultural customs as they adapted to the United States. They took pride in their heritage. Aurora Flores remembered the first time her grandmother played the accordion. My mouth opened and my eyes widened as I heard life breathe from the wrinkled accordion skin. This music took me to where I came from. It helped me understand the traditions of my grandparents. It gave me strong foundations that helped me to survive. No matter where I was born or what language I speak, I am Boricua, a Puerto Rican in New York. Flores is a writer, composer, and leader of a salsa band. Immigrants also come to the United States from Central America. Some have immigrated because their governments changed, were taken over by military leaders, or run by dictators who did not tolerate opposition. Some have come to escape violence. There are Latin Americans who immigrate to escape political persecution and even death, including those who have come from Nicaragua and El Salvador. They sought asylum, a safe place in the United States. They were refugees, a different kind of immigrant with their own stories to tell. Next, when we come back, I believe we're going to be talking about Cuba or Cuba and Cuban immigration. All right, so that was Mexico. Very, very interesting how much amnesia we have when it comes to Mexico. All right, we are now jumping back in to the turn of the century and the Great Migration. I did forget to pick up that book, but the book is called, if you want to read about the Great Migration in detail, The book is called The Warmth of Many Suns. The Warmth of Many Suns. And it's been out for a couple of years now, so you should be able to check it out at your local library if you have a library card. So this is one of Kadir Nelson's beautifully painted pieces that represent the Negro leaving South and moving North. Put some hearts on the screen. Put some hearts on the screen if you know of or you have relatives that told you about their Great Migration. I know that I have relatives in Georgia, and I believe some of them, well, my relatives started out in South Carolina. Some of them moved from South Carolina to North Carolina on my mother's side of the family. And on my father's side of the family, they moved from South Carolina to Georgia. And then I believe from Georgia to Florida. And then some left Georgia and they headed to Ohio. So I have a lot of relatives in Ohio. Turn of the century and the Great Migration. Freedom could make folks proud, but it didn't make them rich. Felix Haywood, former slave. The years after Reconstruction were some of the darkest since slavery. After we had made some progress, the rug was pulled out from under us and the control of the South ended up back in the hands of the same breed of people who had always had it. Remember, after slavery, they actually did give black people reparations. They promised them that 40 acres and a mule. And then the next president came in and rescinded that offer. They gave the land back to the original slave owners. Okay? So when people say, I don't understand why black people want reparations and blah, 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 and why should they get reparations? You have to understand, because we already were given them. We were promised them. They handed them out and then they took them back. All right? So we're only asking for them to actually keep their word. We're not asking them to make up something new. We're actually asking them to keep their word. All right? For clarity. We were expected to keep quiet, walk with our eyes downcast, and bow to white folks, being ever so careful not to cause trouble. It was a dangerous time for us. We were being kidnapped, lynched, shot, and burned all over the South in reaction to our freedom. We had to stick together and watch out for each other like a big family. What's new? Let me read that sentence one more time, because some of us still don't get it. We had to stick together and watch out for each other like a big family. Millions of black folks were trapped in the South under the thumb of Jim Crow. And we might have stayed that way a lot longer if it weren't for all of the trouble in Europe. All right? Remember how in the other book, we were talking about how Europe in that war made a difference in how long people began to focus in on terrorizing black people. Now, it's not particularly easy to describe what was happening in Europe at the time, but I can tell you that in 1914, Archduke Ferdinand, who was next in line to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was assassinated. In a very short time, countries all over Europe started choosing sides and lining up for war. Before we knew it, countries all around the world were being pulled into the mess, including ours. With the war coming, America needed to build weapons. There were plenty of factories up north that at the time were filled with European immigrant workers. Women and black folks were generally not welcome. All right? So how does our story tie into this story? Right? Our story ties into this story because the immigrants were working up north. All right? The European immigrants. And black people and women were generally not welcome in those jobs. But many, many more people were needed to build weapons for the coming war. So, as fighting began in Europe, America stopped letting most of the immigrants into the country. With so many new factories, there weren't enough immigrants to take those jobs. So, as a last resort, the factory owners gave the jobs to women and black folks. Word about the new jobs spread like wildfire. The Chicago Defender, a black newspaper that was passed around in churches and barbershops, invited all to come north. So, how do churches and black businesses play a role in black employment? They were the places that black people could find out the news. They were the places that black people could find out information about how to improve their lives economically. I know we try to say that the black church was not involved in these things, but history says otherwise. Just thought I'd throw that plug in there. On railroad trains, porters bragged about how well black folks were doing up north. Family members who had already gone there wrote letters saying that they earned several times more than what they had on the farm and that black folks could vote, go to good schools, and fancy movie theaters, dress like movie stars. It all sounded pretty fine. Despite the trouble we had with white folks and the boll weevil beetle that was eating up cotton and destroying farmers' crops, most of us had grown to love the South and never seriously thought about leaving. The South was home, but like hundreds of thousands of black folks who weighed the trouble of living there against the opportunities up north, we felt it was time to go. Well, here it is, 2018, and I can definitely say there isn't a place, I would say, in the United States right now that black people can look to and say it's better to live here. Why? Why? Because they're terrorizing people in the north and they're terrorizing people in the south and they're terrorizing people on the East Coast and they're terrorizing people on the West Coast. So, yeah. It's hard to look at the United States and say, oh, this side of the country is better for black people. You might find cities that are better for black people, but we're talking entire regions of the country that made this a better decision for black people who are living in the South to move up north. All right. So they began to weigh, possible burning down of my family. Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Saw a documentary last night covering the LA riots and Rodney King riots saying the same thing. Right. So they began to weigh, burnt up crops, possibly burning my house down, maybe burning down my place of worship, possibly being accused of something that's going to get me or my family members hung, or leaving it all and moving up north. Let's see how hard that decision is going to be for me to make. All right. So they began to weigh their options and say, let's take a chance on the north. Now, leaving was easier said than done. White folks didn't exactly want us to go. Let me take a sip of my orange juice on that. Because I was having a conversation with the Lord about this last night. Leaving was easier said than done. All right? Because white folks didn't exactly want us to leave the South and go north. Here's why. As much as some white people don't like black people, they still need them. We're still the major consumer of goods. All right? And if we pull our 1.3 trillion or billion dollars, all right, it's going to cause problems. Why? Because other cultures aren't buying stuff like we're buying it. Period. They're just not. And so on one hand, they some of them hate you, but on the other hand, they know that they need black consumerism to keep the markets going. They need somebody who's going to be buying stuff. So white people didn't exactly want us to go. And here's the other piece. In order to keep up a attitude as they did back then, in order to keep up an attitude of superiority, you've got to have somebody to measure against your notion of superiority. So if everybody that you've been treating poorly or inferiorly gets up and walks away, then it makes your argument a moot point, right? Because then it's just you and you. All right. Then it's just you and you. So there was some psychological and financial reasoning behind why they didn't exactly want them to leave the South. After all, we worked their fields and paid their rents. If we all upped and left, they would have been in a real fix. What's new? Hello. So they tried their best to stop us. They banned Northern black papers. Police officers harassed black folks at the train stations. Clerks ignored us when we tried to buy train tickets, and they even stopped the train in some places altogether. But it didn't work, honey. No matter what they did, they couldn't stop us from leaving any more than they could stop the rain from falling. We had made up our minds. My family went by train like most black folks, but some drove, rode on horseback or on a mule, and even walked. It took almost a full day to ride by train from Virginia to Chicago. We celebrated when we made it across the Mason-Dixon line and moved from the Jim Crow car to cars where white folks sat. Some people even started praying and singing because they were on an exodus from the South. The train was full of black folks on their way to Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Detroit, or New York City. We learned that Southern black folks were pouring into neighborhoods like Harlem and the South Side of Chicago, bringing Southern comforts like jazz and blues music and Southern cooking to the big cities. When we moved north, we had to change our way of doing things. In the South, we mostly depended on the owner of the land for what we needed: food, shelter, schools, as raggedy as they were, and work. Everything was purchased on credit. The history of black people and credit in the South. Somebody should write a book about that. But up north, we had to find it for all ourselves. It made us much more independent. And before I keep reading, I want to show you this illustrated image of black people taking the train and pulling up north. All right. In many ways, life was better for us. Pap, Daddy, Mother, and all of the grown folks in my family found plenty of work. And we felt we had a bit more freedom, but we also learned that Jim Crow had made the trip right along with us. There was only one part of town where we could find a place to live. We're talking now about the history of redlining. And the best jobs were closed to us. We also didn't know that we had all walked right into the middle of what would be a huge pennies on the dollar, working long hours in unsafe factories, and it made a lot of people angry. Workers began to form labor unions. Yes, labor unions were formed as an affront to black people working. They formed labor unions and organized strikes on the railroads and mills, coal mines, and shipping docks. It seemed like everybody was ready to strike. Everybody but black people. When we tried it, the factory owners just ignored us. Only the porters made any headway some years later. The owners fought dirty too, honey. When white folks picketed, the owners knew black workers weren't allowed into many of the unions. So they brought them into the factories to break the strike. So, where does the animosity historically come from about black people taking our jobs? When white people didn't want to work and when white people started striking, the owners would bring in black people to break the strike. Okay? It made for some real problems between black and white people up north, and it made for very dangerous times. There were race riots and lynchings all over the north. Don't get it twisted. Just because the lynching memorial is located in Alabama does not mean that it's only for the lynchings that took place in the South. All right? Like most black folks, Booker T. Washington, our most popular leader in the early 1900s, wanted equal treatment. He felt the best way to get it was for us to stop all the fussing and get to work. In the years after Reconstruction, he built Tuskegee Institute into a great school that taught black folks skills they could use to get ahead. Booker T thought we could gain respect by providing services to white people and by showing that we could make our own money. Now, I actually read a autobiography on W.E.B. Du Bois, who was really actually against this thought of getting into trade and work and all of that. He was actually against this thought. But eventually, later in his life, he came to agree with Booker T. Washington about the need for trade, for black people to learn trades. All right. So white people love the idea, of course, but many black folks began to disagree with Booker T. Washington. They said the problem was bigger than money. Racism had been spoon-fed to generations of American children. What's new? All right, and this is showing a painting of the workers on strike. All right. Unfair practices. For hundreds of years, and it had convinced many black and white folks that white people were better than black people in every way. The hatred it stirred between the two races took on a life of its own. America badly needed a way past it. In any case, the fight for equality was put on hold when America entered the First World War in the middle of April 1917. Black men were eager to join the military, although very few black troops saw combat. Most black soldiers worked in labor battalions. The war ended about a year later in 1918. It's funny how things work out sometimes. War is a terrible thing, but strangely enough, this one did black folks some good. It had pulled over 1 million of us out of the South and helped us onto our feet. Now, it's also very strange because if you start looking at patterns of war history, you start to see that anytime black people really start pushing for equality, boom, World War One. That push gets put on hold. Black people join the military. They go fight. They come home, and they still have to push for equality. Pushing for equality during civil rights, boom, we're in a world war. We're in a war, rather. And guess what happens? It slows down the push for equality, and all of that supposed funding that was supposed to come from the government to begin to help black communities rebuild, all that funding went to funding a war. And this is what Martin Luther King had a problem with. Here it is, 2018. Blacks have been pushing for equal rights, equality, justice, end to police brutality since 2012. And there's a potential for, guess what? Another war. I wonder if we could see the pattern. All right. Next time when we come back next week with this book, we're going to be talking about Harlem and the Vote for Women. Harlem and the Vote for Women. We're going to finish up today by talking about two places We're going to be talking about Kingman Park, and we're going to be talking about banking black, which is not a place, it's a concept. All right, and this is coming from History of the Black Dollar by Angel Rich. Remember, we talked about, and we're going to be talking about Black Fortunes, or it's back there, I can't reach it. Black Fortunes, the first 6 Black people that were able to move out of slavery and to become the first 6 Black millionaires in the United States. So we are going to be covering that book soon. All right. Kingman Park, 1947. Kingman Park, the hidden jewel of D.C., is the first neighborhood designed for Black affluent residents in the country. Named after Brigadier General Dan Christie Kingman, the former head of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Kingman Park was established in 1919 as parkland for the Anacostia Water Park. In 1891, the Army Corps of Engineers convinced Congress to approve the dredging of the Anacostia River to create a more functional waterway for commercial use, while using the dredged material to build up mud flats to create dry land. In 1927, Charles Sager, a D.C. real estate developer, started building homes in Kingman Park. The first 40 homes were built on 24th Street Northeast and sold by July 1928. In 1931, Sager started building another 350 homes, opening the sale of these houses to be potentially purchased by Blacks, making Kingman Park home of some of the first Black homeowners in the country. Housed on Capitol Hill South, town is located within 1 mile of Stadium Armory Metro Station. Beautiful willow oak trees line the most prominent section of Kingman Park. Comprised of about 60 acres and 40 square blocks, the community has a rough triangular shape pressed against the enclave on the Anacostia River. The look and feel of the area is that of a Washington suburb. Interestingly, Kingman Park was originally planned for whites, but they did not want to buy. Thus, in 1930, Sager led a promotional campaign that included and indicated only the finest Black families can buy here. He realized a huge market opportunity for the Black wealthy. Over the years, Young Elementary School and Brown Junior High School was formed. These schools would later receive historic designation as some of the first schools in America to support the Black community. Since its formation, Kingman Park has remained a close-knit Black middle-class community. The first Black millionaire in D.C. lived there along with other Black lawyers, doctors, dentists, business owners, and government employees. The first and only golf course designed for Blacks in D.C., Langston Golf Course, was constructed for the neighborhood in 1939. It remained one of the few places Blacks could freely play golf until the 1950s. Wow. Think about that. It's 2018, and Black women just got kicked off of a golf course and basically told, this place isn't for you. A few original residents still live there, such as John D. and Alberta Sisters, Angel Rich's great-grandparents, family on the prime block of 21st Street. Today, Kingman Park holds 10,000 residents and is growing. It is one of the last best-kept secrets in D.C., with skyrocketing property value. In 2016, the Kingman Park Civic Association nominated Kingman Park neighborhood as a historic district to protect the community from new development and hopefully from gentrification. All right. Lastly, back to the topic of Black banking, or banking Black. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown and deposit your money in the Tri-State Bank. I guess you will never believe who said that. You'll never believe who actually called on Black people to divest out of white banks or white-owned banks who will not give them loans or give them high-interest loans which many banks have been fined for and are now having to pay back. You'll never guess who actually gave that call. Can anybody guess? I'll give you 30 seconds. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown and deposit your money in the Tri-State Bank. You know who it was? Let me tell you who it was. It was Martin Luther King. Martin? Yes, Martin Luther King. In Memphis, Tennessee, on April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech. And if you go back to my archives on my YouTube channel, I've got several playlists about MLK. And one of them is "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech. We actually read that speech. Somebody got it. Anytime you start messing with people's money in this country, you're going to get some pushback. All right? You're going to get pushback because, sadly to say, mammon runs most of people's thought process in this country. So the night before, okay, April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King starts telling people to take their money out of banks and put them in the black banks. In the speech, he asked blacks to bank black. Hashtag that. Bank black. Meaning to put their money in black-owned banks. Specifically, King said, we've got to strengthen black institutions. So now you have to look around you and you have to say, what are the black institutions? Where are the black institutions? Did you know that churches are black institutions? You know those churches that everybody keeps coming against and asking you to tear down, and they keep trying to tear them down, they keep trying to destroy. What are they trying to do? It's not just about Jesus. It's not just about your faith. It's not just about people feeling, oh, black people are naive. No, understand the bigger picture. You are destroying an institution. Matter of fact, one of the last standing institutions for the black community to actually come together and get information from. And I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the building. All right? The buildings. That's why they were burning them in the South. I burn your building, I burn up your institution, I burn the place that houses your church records, your history, all of that stuff. Yeah. We've got to strengthen the black institutions. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks downtown and deposit your money in the Tri-State Bank. We want a bank in movement in Memphis. We begin the process of building a greater economic base. Boom. Drop that beat. You want some base? Drop some economic base. King was assassinated the very next day. Now, if we can't put two and two together as a black community, I don't know what to tell us. He was assassinated the very next day. He made a call for shifting money from one place in the black community to the next place. He made a call that dealt with consumerism and economics, and he was assassinated the next day. His hopes of increasing black wealth died along with him. Blacks commonly relied on black community banks in cities such as Chicago, Atlanta, Richmond, and DC for providing loans to black people, as well as boosting black churches, black businesses, and ultimately black neighborhoods during segregation. After desegregation, money began to flow from black to white-owned banks. So your money and your economic base and your economy to help build black institutions left your community and went to white-owned banks, and then you put your money there, but you can't get money out. And you have a hard time getting a loan with a decent interest rate. Decreasing the value of black communities. So when people say, what happened to our communities? Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? This is where the money went. All right? So if you're spending, and you are saving, but it's going into a bank that won't lend your people money to build institutions, guess what? You're going to continue to be behind. According to Michael Grant, president of the National Bankers Association, representing 200 minority and women-owned banks, there was a toxic side to integration. He says, the financial meltdown of 2007, remember that? Wiped out 40% of black wealth in the United States. 40%. Killing off many of these already struggling community banks that were not part of the Wall Street bailout. So remember when Wall Street, when all the white banks were being bailed out, guess what? Black banks weren't. Just 25 black-owned banks remain in America, according to a 2016 FDIC report. And guess what? They're going to be trying to wipe those out too. Compared with 45 10 years ago. Grant states that are at a peak of the banking black movement, there were more than 100 at one period of time. Racial bias in the lending industry remains all too common, despite legislation aimed at preventing it. In 1992, a landmark study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston examined 4,500 mortgage loan applications and discovered that black borrowers were twice as likely to get rejected for loans as white borrowers with similar credit histories. This is why you're seeing a resurgence of especially black churches creating CDCs or community development corporations to begin to help people with real estate, to begin to acquire land, to build housing and institutions back again, because discrimination plays a part in locking people out. There are some churches that are now working on forming banks and forming credit unions. Why? Because why are we going to keep putting our money over here and we can't get the money out for when we need it? All right? It makes sense. More recently, an economics professor at the University of Massachusetts found that banks in Boston and across the state of Massachusetts continue to reject Black and Latino borrowers for home mortgages at a much higher rate than whites. In fact, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is now sending undercover employees into banks across the country as potential home buyers. In 2016, the CFPB sued Bancorp South Bank in Mississippi for allegedly discriminating against blacks. In this specific situation, they sent black and white employees to the bank to apply for a home loan. The black person who had better credit, cash, credit, capital, the black person who had better credit was allegedly steered toward a smaller loan with a higher interest rate. Because remember, as we're learning about cash, capital, and credit on Fridays, we've talked about these scenarios. You can be building your credit, but you have to understand that there's still a human element of discrimination that can operate. All right? So this black person who had better credit was steered towards smaller loans with a higher interest rate. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, some black banks have seen a recent surge in new bank accounts. Rapper Killer Mike asked blacks on BET and MTV to put some of their money in black banks, creating the hashtag BankBlack. This call to action led to Citizens Trust Bank, the only black bank remaining in Atlanta, receiving 8,000 new applications a few days after his request. In 1927, Major R.R. Wright and C.C. Spalding formed the Negro Bankers Association, the first professional organization for blacks in finance. In 1948, the organization changed its name to National Bankers Association and still exists today. In 1970, Joseph Searles III became the first black member of the New York Stock Exchange. 1970, the first black member. That same year, economist, university president, and corporate executive Clifton Wharton Jr. served as Secretary of State during the Clinton administration, assisted Rockefeller on Latin American development, and became the first black president of Michigan State University. In 1978, Wharton became the president of the State University of New York, and by 1987, he became the CEO of TIAA-CREF, making him the first black chairman and CEO of a major U.S. corporation. For those of y'all who don't know, TIAA-CREF is a education 401, an education investment company. By 1993, Harry Alford and Kay DeBow founded the National Black Chamber of Commerce. What does all this mean for us as Black Americans? It means we have work to do. It means that we have to be smarter about our consuming. It means we have to be smarter about where we invest our dollars. It means that we should be supporting black business. And it means that none of these things should be a second guess. All right. So think about it as we are now in the what? Yeah. We're in the second quarter of the year. We're in the second quarter of the year. Think about, how are you supporting black business? Are you buying black products? You don't have to be black to support black business. Are you buying black products? Are you searching out ways to invest in black businesses? You can be an angel investor. All right. Everything. There's plenty of GoFundMe, business investments. There's Kickstarter. There's a lot of ways that you can invest in a black business on a smaller scale, even if you only have a certain amount of money set aside. So think about black banking, supporting black businesses, ownership. Look around you at institutions, black institutions that you can support. Even if you say, I can give $5 a month to this institution. What are you doing personally to support the things around you that build up your community? We can complain all day. We can whine all day. We can talk about how people won't help us. We can talk about all of that. But at the end of the day, you have to look at yourself and say, what am I doing to move my community forward? What am I doing to move my community forward? And sad to say, we have a lot of black people in our community that have the wealth and the wherewithal to move the community forward, and they still aren't doing it. So even as you get wealth, think about, and even as you obtain wealth, think about how you're going to steward the wealth that you obtain. All right. This has been another Daring Dialogues. I've been your host, Shantae Charles. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. You don't have to join me every hour, Monday through Friday, but you choose to do so, and I am honored by that. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I hope I have said something that was helpful. I hope that I have said something that will get you thinking about how you can invest into our community, how you can give back, how you can support the institutions that are yet going. And remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. We will be on tomorrow, Periscope and Facebook Live. So if you're watching me by YouTube, you're going to have to go to either Periscope tomorrow or my Facebook Live on my personal page. And we're going to be talking about spiritual tribalism in the church, tribalism among women. We're going to try to talk about those three things. What is tribalism? Is tribalism a good thing? How you can avoid certain things about tribalism that are super negative. And hopefully we'll be able to have some good conversation around that. All right. So if y'all want to chat back, make sure you comment in the chat box on Periscope and on Facebook Live. That chat will, of course, be open. So I'll be able to see your comments. All right. Take care and God bless.